Greetings and welcome to the basement. In this video, I'm going to take a quick look at the post-processing system in Unity. This is just going to be a lightweight overview of getting it installed and configuring a very basic global volume. Configuring a local volume will come in a different video. I'm also not going to be going over each of the individual types of post-processing that comes out of the box, so to speak. Honestly, you will best be served reading up the documentation on those modules and experimenting to see how they affect the scenes. Now, before I get going, I want to talk a little bit about the scene here. I've got just a real basic little scene set up. Hit the play button, and I mean, it's serviceable, but it kind of feels a little flat. Like there's something missing. Actually, let's be honest, there's a lot missing. This is a scene that I just threw together in, 30 minutes or so. But there's definitely some room for improvement that we can go here with the visuals. It just kind of feels a little flat. And that is something that post-processing can help with. Now, a quick shout out to the various packages that are being used with this. I am using a character model and the skybox from the Polygon Sci-Fi pack from Cinti Studios. I am using the basic locomotion version of the controller from Invector's third-person shooter template. The terrain materials come from the Nobiax, the Use Free Ground Materials package. Terrain was created with the terrain stamps that comes from Unity's sample terrain tool pack here. The water and trees are coming from the standard assets package. None of those are necessary really to use post-processing. It just gave me a nice little scene to show off the post-processing effects. So how do we get started? Well, the first thing is that we need to get the post-processing package installed. It is not one of the packages that comes along by default. You're going to have to get into your package manager. Of course, if you do not have that window open, you can go to Window and Package Manager. And you need to find the post-processing package. I just type in the word post usually in the search bar here, and there it is. It is not a preview package, so you do not need to be in advanced mode. It'll show up just by default. Now, I have already installed this to save on some time. But if you have not installed it, obviously you will have an install button down here. Click on that, let it install, and you will be good to go. Now, upon getting that installed, we have a couple of components that we can add to objects. But before we add those components on, I need to configure a layer. So I'm going to go over here to Layers, and I'm going to go to Edit Layers. Now, the exact name and the layer that you use is utterly irrelevant. The key thing here is that we need a layer that I can define, that I can put the camera on, and that I can put the post-processing layer component on. These things have to match. If they don't match, you don't get post-processing. Now, just as a matter of habit, I like to put the post-processing layer on user layer 31. Again, I want to stress, there's nothing magic about the name. There's nothing magic about this layer. This is just where I put this layer, so that way I can just glance at my layers to know whether or not I have properly set this up for post-processing. Upon having my layer set correctly, I'm going to switch over to my camera. Now there are two components that I need to put on here if I just want to get a basic global post-processing volume going. So I'm going to click on Add Component. I'm going to type in Post. And I need both of these components. I need a post-process layer. Drop that on. And I'm going to go ahead and collapse camera, assuming that Unity wants to stop lagging on me. There we go. Thank you. So I'm going to need this post-process layer, and I'm going to need a post-process volume. Both of these things are necessary. In the case of the post-process layer, the only thing that I have to configure is this layer property. Now, right now, it is warning me no layer has been set. The trigger will never be affected by volumes. Now, you can set the post-processing layer to everything or default. But it is going to warn you that this is probably a bad idea in that it's going to cost you in the performance category. If you've got a fairly simple scene that doesn't have a lot of objects to it, you might be able to get away with being lazy and telling the layer that it's on everything. This is not a good idea. It should be configured to the same layer that your camera is on, which, of course, as we can see right now, my camera is not on the post-processing layer, so I'm going to change the camera's layer to match. These two layers must match. If they do not match, you do not get post-processing. That's the only thing that I have to configure. Now, I am going to just to show it off, I'm going to grab subpixel morphological anti-aliasing. Not because I like it or anything, it's just I think it sounds cool. So I'm going to put some anti-aliasing on this scene, smooth out some of those rough edges. That is a strictly optional step. You do not have to put on anti-aliasing here. Next, in order to get a global volume working, shockingly enough, we have to check the Is Global checkbox. I know, I bet you didn't see that one coming. But yeah, if we do not check this, then instead what the post-process volume is looking for is a literal volume, like you've got a box collider or a sphere collider, something like that, that is set as a trigger. It's looking for that to base its effects off of. But instead, I want this post-processing to occur everywhere in the scene. So I'm going to set it to Is Global. The last thing that we need to set is a profile. This controls what effects are active and what their settings are. There are two main ways of getting this created. You can come down to the Assets area and right-click Create Post-Processing Profile and create a profile that way, and then drag and connect it to the profile category here. Conversely, you can also come here and click on the New button, and it will automatically create a profile that has the same name as the game object with the parentheses profile put around it. And just as a neatness feature, I guess, it will create a directory of the current scene underscore profiles and put said profile in there. Nothing magical about this. You do not have to have your profiles in a directory called underscore profiles, and the profile name does not have to match the game object. That is just a convenience thing that you get when you click on the New button. And of course, by clicking on the New button, it also automatically links that profile in. Upon having a profile added in, you have the ability to add an effect. Now, there are two locations in which you can modify this. You can select the game object that has the profile or has the post-processing volume and edit the profile from there, or you can select the profile in the Assets area in your project folders and modify the effects from there. 6 of one, half dozen of another. It does the same thing. You are still modifying this asset even if you are looking at a game object in the hierarchy and modifying it through the inspector that way. It does not matter. Now, one of the first things I like to do when I'm working with post-processing is I want to verify that I have set up the post-processing correctly. To do that, I will add in a color grading effect because I usually want color grading anyways. And I will come over here and turn on the color filter, and I will change the color filter to some obnoxious color. And as you can see, upon changing my color filter to said obnoxious color, it looks like I'm viewing the world through one of those cheap plastic spy glasses that you use to read secret messages on cereal boxes. At least, they used to have those things to read secret messages on cereal boxes. It's been a while since I've bought kids cereal, so I don't know if they still do that. And while I absolutely do not want to keep said obnoxious filter going on here, it verifies that everything is working. Or I could put on the ever popular, well, I'm not going to mention what this filter is commonly called. I'm sure you can use your imaginations. Like an obligation if you're doing a sci-fi game, I think, or cyberpunk, I should say. But yes, this verifies that my post-processing is working correctly. What are some things that can cause this to not work? Well, if your layer on your object, on your camera, does not match the layer on the volume, the layer on the post-processing layer, if these two layers don't match, nothing happens. So layer is set to nothing, or even if I set the layer to something else, no post-processing. These layers have to match in order for the post-processing to work. And as I'm showing here, it doesn't matter which layer it is, just as long as they match. By the way, you can specify multiple layers here. That is not something I am going to get into, even remotely, in this video as to why you would do that. For the moment, for the basic level, just have one layer in this list and make sure that this layer and this layer match. Another thing that can cause the post-processing to not work is if you forgot to check the isGlobal. Again, if you do not have isGlobal checked, it is looking for a literal trigger volume that you have defined with a collider. If you want this to just be applied always, regardless of the camera's location, you need to have isGlobal checked. Now, while it's very unlikely that this value has been changed because you have to actually change it, another thing that can cause your post-processing to not show up is if for some reason you've turned your weight down to 0. So if this volume has a weight of 0, that means it has no importance and it's not going to show. Like I said, it is very unlikely that that is the cause because you would have had to have deliberately changed the weight. Weight should be left at 1. Again, in future videos, I will talk about scenarios in which, where you would alter the weight. The final thing that can cause the post-processing to not show up is if you do not have a profile linked here. You might have done the right-click create method of creating a profile and done all of your editing over here, and then forgot to link it up to the actual volume here. So that could be another cause of not seeing your post-processing effects. And that's all there really is to it. And then from there, it is just a question of figuring out what properties you want your thing to have. So, maybe I want to have, really turn up the saturation here, make the colors pop a little bit, maybe increase the contrast, or I could, even, actually turn on the contrast. Could completely just gray out the contrast. Of course, probably don't want to make it too hyper contrasty. I could shift the hue. All sorts of fun things, but actually I'm going to turn that off. And so now I'm beginning to get, that's the scene's already improving a little bit. The colors are more saturated. It has made it a little bit darker. And you've got lots of things to play around with. Like I said, I am not going to go over each of these because there's a lot of individual little dials and such to each of these settings here. What I will do is direct you to the post-processing manual page. Honestly, if you do a search for Unity post-processing, this should be the top link that comes up in the search results. This does a good job of going through and just giving you a brief overview, and then talking about all of the different settings and giving you examples of what they look like and what they do, and gives you links to further documentation for knowing how to control those specific settings. And with that, you can get some pretty interesting stuff. I will leave off with putting in everybody's favorite thing, putting in some bloom. And let's see here. I don't think I actually have a sun in here someplace. So let's see here. Let's look at the game. Nope. Let's turn up the intensity here. And let's have some purple bloom, because everybody needs purple bloom. And I might have a little bit too dark of a scene for this to work, but you know what? It's nothing a little intensity crank can't handle. Nope. Okay. Well, that was a failed demonstration. Forgot that I had turned down my lighting intensity on my global directional lights, so I don't have enough shinies going on to really trigger the wonderful gloriness that is just excessive bloom. And so I'll sign off here. If you have enjoyed this video or picked up a couple of new tips or tricks, go ahead and hit that like button down there. If, on the other hand, this is all old news and I have wasted your time, well, the dislike button is right next to it. Until next time.